Welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to the Green Home NYC September Forum. It's titled City of Yes, Why This is the Right Climate Policy for New York City. My name is Karina Solis, and I'm a volunteer for this organization. And in addition to that, I'm an energy storage project developer at one of New York State's largest development companies, New Leaf Energy. I'm just going to introduce the panelists, but I'll generally be moderating this panel. So just to introduce Green Home NYC, it's an all-volunteer nonprofit organization that has been promoting energy efficiency and sustainability in the built environment, as well as supporting green professional development since 2002. Green Home NYC has 3 main programs. You can see them on here. So there's a Green Careers program that hosts monthly events on the second Tuesday of each month. These are great events for people that are interested in transitioning into sustainability to learn more about career opportunities. Our monthly forums are held every 3rd Wednesday of the month, which is what we're doing today. Each forum focuses on a different topic pertaining to environmental sustainability. And then lastly, our green building tours provide opportunities to get a closer look at energy efficient buildings and sustainability-focused businesses. You can learn more at greenhomenyc.org, and you can also subscribe there to the regular newsletter to get updates on events and stories about recent legislation, community action, and other initiatives that pertain to its mission. By a show of hands, who in the room is a Green Home NYC volunteer? Great. These are the people that make us who we are. Everything at Green Home NYC is done by volunteers, and if you're interested in volunteering, speaking, writing, or contributing to future events, please talk to any of the volunteers that raised their hand today, or you can reach out to this team at forums@greenhomenyc.com. Next, I want to thank our hosts here at Nixon Peabody, who have generously donated their space for use tonight, as well as the refreshments that you may have seen outside the room. You're welcome to them. Hosts like Nixon Peabody make it possible for us to offer these, have made it possible over the past 2 decades to have these types of events. Okay, so let me, oops, I skipped the slide. Okay, so let me introduce our topic and speakers. So tonight, we're really excited to be hearing from 2 local professionals and their work on sustainability policy and energy storage as we accelerate the energy transition away from fossil fuel-based energy. Tonight's topic is the mayor's proposed zoning amendment called City of Yes for carbon neutrality. There are a number of exciting changes proposed in this amendment, and we'll start with the general overview of them, and then we'll talk in depth about one of the components of City of Yes, which is energy storage, and in particular, we're going to dive deep into the safety because it has been a really hot topic lately. So our first speaker from the New York League of Conservation Voters is Aaliyah Sumro. Thank you. Aaliyah Sumro. And Nick Petrakis from Energy Safety Resources Group. He was previously the assistant director for the sustainability unit at FDNY, so has had a lot of diverse experience in energy storage. So we'll first start with speaker presentations, and then we'll bring them back up for Q&A for any questions that you guys have. And then after we wrap up, we can hang out for continuing the conversations, a little bit of networking, etc. So I will pass this over to our first speaker.
My name's Aaliyah Sumro. I'm the Deputy Director for New York City Policy at the New York League of Conservation Voters. NYLCV is a statewide environmental advocacy organization. We advocate for clean water, clean air, renewable energy, through policy and political action. So I focus on New York City policy very broadly. This is just one piece that we're advocating for this year. I do a lot of policy with like parks and open space, transportation, buildings, and energy. So we try to look at the climate crisis and environmental justice issues through like a comprehensive lens. So getting into it, well, first, just like raising hands, how many people are familiar with this zoning proposal? Okay, cool. Sounds good. So yes, as it stands, New York City's current zoning resolution has a lot of outdated regulations when it comes to green building investments, whether it's rooftop solar, energy storage systems, etc. So the mayor released this proposal back in April, and that started the public land use process, which is called the Uniform Land Use Review Process, ULURP. That's a whole nother can of worms, so we could talk about that separately. But basically, this proposal is trying to update our city zoning resolution so that we meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals, both at the city level and at the state level. And the proposal would hopefully get rid of a lot of red tape when it comes to energy storage systems, EV charging throughout the city, bike and e-bike parking. It would add, like, composting is not even mentioned in the zoning resolution, and that's a huge thing that's rolling out in the city. So it's really trying to get us to 2023, hopefully. And the city has broken down the whole proposal into 4 buckets: energy, buildings, transportation, and waste. And there's a ton of different proposals within. There's 17 proposals total. So NYLCV believes that this is like really important. We don't think this is going to solve everything. We don't think it's going to change everything overnight, but this is like one change that we can make, one tool in the toolbox that will help building owners and other people help us meet our city's goals. So just to get into like more details, the first one, that one of the goals that City of Yes for carbon neutrality is trying to achieve is facilitating more renewable energy aspects in our building environment. So the zoning proposal will try to update the zoning resolution to make it easier to have rooftop solar. There's a lot of restrictions currently about sloped roofs, height limits, etc. So this would facilitate more solar parking canopies and energy storage. For instance, it would open up about 8,500 acres of parking lots across the city for solar panel usage. And it would also allow solar panels across roofs in most of our buildings and more than 8,500 acres. So for instance, energy storage, which we'll talk about in a bit, this would allow energy storage systems to be a primary use in residential districts when it's on a site of up to 10,000 square feet. And it would also get rid of energy storage restrictions in commercial and manufacturing districts. So this would hopefully open up more areas of the city for rooftop solar, parking canopies, and energy storage systems. The proposal would also help us move toward cleaner buildings. So this would help and update the zoning resolution to allow for more facade retrofits. Currently, the zoning resolution restricts its floor area ratio from making more energy efficient facade retrofits. So the zoning resolution would be rolling out more details to allow us building owners to go into like the street just a few inches. Another is when it comes to transportation, it would be allowing more EV charging in commercial areas of the city, more bike and e-mobility parking in the city as well. And like I said earlier, it would also make some changes when it comes to composting and stormwater retention. For instance, like I said, composting, that word is not mentioned in the zoning resolution. So one example is that this proposal would clarify small-scale composting in neighborhood-focused commercial storefronts. And this is really important because the city recently passed zero waste legislation. So mandatory, composting is going to become mandatory in the city by 2024. So like I said, you know, these are like low-hanging fruits that the city needs to update our zoning resolution to make it easier. And I just wanted to bring this up because it shows all the different proposals and all the different buckets. And again, like, there's a lot more details to the proposal, and city planning has done a great job. There's a lot more details on their website, a lot more presentations that they have. So I can definitely follow up and, you know, provide that information if people are more interested in the nitty-gritty. But in terms of the policy aspect, we really think that this is a very important proposal. We included it in our annual New York City policy agenda. And this is important, one, so it helps the city meet its greenhouse gas reduction goals, as well as at the state level. So at the state level, they passed in 2019 the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which mandates all kinds of greenhouse gas reduction goals over the next few years. And then at the city level, you know, we have Local Law 97. So that's rolling out in the next few years as well to reduce our emissions in a lot of our building stock in the city. So this will hopefully help building owners do that. And then there's the environmental justice component. So not only is this going to help us fight climate change, but we believe that this will help make the air cleaner. So again, this is one tool for environmental justice. It will help city air quality as a whole as we move toward renewable energy. You know, for instance, New York City is targeting 1,000 megawatts of solar citywide by 2030. And 500 megawatts of energy storage by 2025. These are city goals. I don't think it's legally required, but, you know, hopefully the city can move toward that goal. And then one thing I wanted to call out was that while this is just a zoning proposal, we at NYLCV believe that the time is now because there is a ton of funding at the federal and at the state level. So, you know, the urgency is climate change, environmental justice, but also there's a lot of money for building owners, et cetera, to leverage that funding. So, for instance, the Inflation Reduction Act was passed last year. The New York State, it's called NYSERDA. They have a lot of grants for building owners. Voters approved the New York State Environmental Bond Act last year, so that has a lot of funding for like state-owned and city-owned buildings to retrofit to reduce greenhouse gas. And then I believe it was last year, New York State renewed the New York City solar tax abatement. So that's just one example of like, you know, this is like very urgent that the city should approve this. And then to contextualize the process, so city planning proposed this in April, which started the public review process. It went to all 59 community boards throughout the city. They received positive recommendations from 25 community boards. I don't believe every community board gave a recommendation, and community boards in the land use review process, not sure how familiar y'all are, but it's advisory. So it's still positive that a lot of them were supportive. City planning also got positive recommendations from the Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queensborough presidents, which is great. One thing I did want to mention was that overall, I think a lot of community boards, the ones that did express concerns about this proposal, was about energy storage, which we'll talk about, and aesthetic concerns about neighborhood character, which I know is another can of worms, but you know, I feel as like the policy person at my organization that aesthetic concerns are important, but the climate crisis is too urgent. You know, I personally have an architecture background, so I'm sure there's architects in here. I think things are too urgent, and I don't actually think that it hurts neighborhood character. I think it's exciting when you see like solar canopies when you're walking around the city. So, you know, that's just to say, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir, but like the more as professionals in this space that we can talk to people to show the positives, you know, that this will help reduce air pollution in our city, it's really important. And then, so after it went to community boards and borough presidents, then it went to the City Planning Commission, which is that it's 13 commissioners, and they approved it on September 11th. I just think there was one negative vote from Staten Island. So, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to energy storage, but, we really think that it's really important that the city approves it. So the next step is going to City Council. So City Council has 50 days from September 11th to review it. It goes through the City Council Subcommittee on Voting, and then Subcommittee on Zoning, and then the City Council Land Use Committee. They vote it out of committee, then it goes to all council members to vote on. So if you want to get involved, I recommend, if you can lobby your local city council member, it's really important that they get behind this, that they have the right information, and that they don't water it down, hopefully. So yeah, that's City of Yes in a nutshell. Feel free to sign up for our newsletters. Definitely, we always are interested in volunteers. So.
Hey everyone, good evening. My name is Nick Petrakis. I am a senior consultant with Energy Safety Response Group. Prior to joining, as Karina had mentioned, Energy Safety Response Group, a really great group of people. I was the Assistant Deputy Director at the New York City Fire Department's Sustainability Unit. So I'm also a professional engineer in the state of New York, and with my cover slide, as I'm sure you guys can see what I'm going to talk about, I get to talk about the hot topic, no pun intended, around energy storage systems. So who's heard in the news about energy storage system fires? Right, e-bikes, recent fires in New York. Yeah, we've been busy. There's a lot going on in energy storage systems, and I guess specifically in the fire safety aspect of it and the engineering aspect of it. But I kind of want to take a few steps back and give you guys a little bit of a history of where it's come from. It seems like it's a very novel and new idea, but New York City is a very densely urban populated environment. Of course, as mentioned, we have Local Law 97, so we want to eliminate fossil fuel burning generation sources. Where are we getting that electricity? Indian Point is shutting down a nuclear reactor. We're down about 3 megawatts of power, I believe. It's got to come from distributed resources. It's got to come from clean energy, wind and solar. But when the sun's not shining, when the wind's not moving, we're not generating electricity. So energy storage systems are that key critical component to bridge that gap, right, when we're not generating power. We have a historic grid, too. I mean, our electricity grid, our Con Ed grid is at least 100 and something years old, right? So making expensive updates to this grid becomes very costly and very difficult. Lithium-ion started coming around 2014 as the new technology, so 2014, 2015 to the city. It was very prominent due to its energy density, to its footprint, and also its cost, too, and availability. At that time, we didn't have requirements for energy storage systems. We didn't have fire codes to govern the safety of energy storage systems. So in the sustainability unit, what we're tasked with is reviewing any sort of new technology, anything that's going to be sort of unique fire safety-wise. So it's not just energy storage systems, it's also combustible cladding and facades. I know we mentioned a green initiative towards that. Solar panels, fuel cells. Anything that's sort of new and unique that might have a challenge for the fire service. And you can just see our tremendous load that we have in the city, right? And how dependent we are on this electricity. So we had to figure out a way to move forward in New York City without stifling this technology. We knew that it was coming. We wanted it to come safely. We wanted to take our time with it. But we also knew that we couldn't just stop it, put a moratorium on it. So we figured, what we're going to start off with? Let's go outdoors. Let's go ground mounted. Let's go rooftop mounted. Rooftop's actually surprisingly good for the fire service, even though it's a challenge to get to. Fires can go up without affecting an internal portion of the building with a mixed occupancy. So 2016, 2017, let's start there. Let's figure this out. Let's get these regulations set, and then we'll figure out indoors. So I'm going to go back a little bit of Energy Storage 101. We had some great pictures of energy storage systems, but really what's inside? It's those cells, those little individual, they're called 18650s. They look like your little AA batteries. They're a little bit bigger than AA's, right? You take a bunch of these cells, you daisy chain them together, now you got a module. Larger module, about 150 to 600 pounds. You take those modules, you stack them up, and now you got a unit. And these are your basic building blocks of almost any energy storage system, lithium-ion energy storage system, whether it's LFP, whether it's NMC, I'm sure you guys have heard these words before. There's a lot of different sub-chemistries of what lithium-ion is. in the fire department, we took it holistically. We don't care if you're an LFP, we don't care if you're an NMC or a lithium-ion technology, and that's sort of when I talk about the New York City rules and the requirements, you'll see why we did that. But basically, these building blocks, these components, you'll put them together, you'll make different size systems. Over here, we have a couple of utility-size systems, your typical Tesla megapacks, right? But we also have residential systems, your power walls, and those other residential systems that are going to be coupled with PV arrays and providing energy to that residential building. And there's layers of safety here. There's what we call a battery management system, which is like the brains of the energy storage system. We're monitoring temperatures and voltages and operating parameters, keeping it safe. This is also, information is being sent to a remote monitoring facility, basically like a data center where people are sitting there 24/7 at a computer, and we're taking a look at where these temperatures are going and what's going on with the system. So there's a tremendous amount of belts and suspenders as far as safety. These are all really electrical stuff, right? So it's trying to prevent it from getting into that fire. What happens if we do get a fire situation, right? These are your typical historic, I want to say historic, some of the early energy storage systems that we were seeing in New York City. They were called walk-in units. So it's your typical Connex. These shipping containers are very easy to find, relatively cheap. Let's take these, let's furnish them up, let's put a bunch of battery racks in it, and now we have an energy storage system, right? But these were enterable. There was a tremendous amount of volume in these systems. So I'm going to talk about thermal runaway and what the hazards are and how we address those hazards. But now we have these large volume containers that could be opened up. And we said, okay, let's take a step back right now. We know that if this goes on fire, if it does go on fire, I'm going to give you guys a little anecdotal story. We could potentially generate some flammable gas. If it builds up in an enclosed environment and it finds an ignition source, that's not good, right? That could hurt firefighters, that could hurt people. We figured out, let's do explosion protection. Let's get the bells and whistles on it. Let's get exhaust fans. Let's do whatever we need. Automatic fire alarm systems. We're developing rules right now. The International Fire Code had almost nothing for energy storage systems. NFPA 855, which I'm going to talk a little bit about, was in its infancy, if not developed at all whatsoever, which is now considered the gold standard for energy storage system safety. So we had to figure all this stuff out. And it wasn't me. It was a group of engineers. It was firefighters. It was the chiefs. And they all got together with code development, and we said we have to figure this out, because if this is coming to New York City, we got to make sure it's safe, right? Then this event happened. 2019, the APS Facility Incident in Surprise, Arizona, Peoria, Arizona. In April of 2019, there was an energy storage system, as you can see at this facility in Arizona. That's what it looked like. If you're not familiar in the area, you think it's just a utility structure. What could be in there? Some data stuff, whatever, right? A jogger was going by in the morning. She saw some smoke coming out of there. She called the fire department. Fire department responds. They're staging as they should. They're sitting there for a couple of hours, 2 hours. Nobody's coming. The alarms didn't even go off. The alarms went off a little bit late. And they have to figure out what's going on. So hazmat teams show up with special monitors, gas sensors. And there was an opening, those doors. Remember I showed you guys those walking containers? They had doors on both ends of this structure. So the hazmat team, the captain in charge and his firefighters gear up, go to that door with their 4 gas meters, and they open up that door slightly to get a measurement. Right away it's at the explosive limit. That's not good if you see that as a firefighter. That's all the time that was needed to get enough oxygen in there to cause a deflagration and an explosion. And that incident happened, that chain link fence. 2 firefighters were blown off past that fence, about 74 feet. Their bunker gear ripped off. Thankfully, they're still alive. They actually just got back into full duty, full service. Oh, I think I had a laser, sorry. It doesn't work on this. That green thing over there is the door. That door was blown off, and the only thing that stopped it was that chain link fence. So this happened. I was actually at the Rock, the fire department training facility at Randall's Island, talking about battery energy storage system safety. Like I am right now. My boss, my current boss, who was a lieutenant in hazmat, taps me on the shoulder and goes, there was an explosion in Arizona. 2 firefighters got seriously injured. That's when we realized we're doing the right thing. We're on the right track. We know that explosions could potentially be a huge hazard. We already have developed rules at this point in New York City to prevent that, right, and put additional safety layers on there. We're heading in the right track. This is going to be an issue. This is going to be a hazard. This technology was built when these codes didn't really exist, so it didn't have those protection measures put in place. This is what we're trying to avoid. So these are your typical hazards. we have stranded energy, heat flux, electric shock, deflagrations. Every single one of these hazards, we figured out a solution, or we tried to address an engineering system to protect it in our codes and standards, whether it be BMS protection, whether it be a water-based sprinkler system, explosion protection, or automatic shutoffs. So we take a tiered approach in New York City at that point when we developed the rules. And we figured out, safety has to be multi-layered. And I'm giving you guys a lot of doom and gloom, and I apologize. This is not a doom and gloom presentation. This is more along the lines of, this is what we saw coming with a lot of really smart people that were at that fire department and understood this technology. And we need to do something. If this is coming into New York City, we need to make sure that it is safe. Is anything going to be 100% safe? As an engineer designing any sort of energy system, nothing's 100% safe, but we can implement as much layers of safety as possible to get it as close as possible. And this is deflagrations, this is explosions, this is what we're avoiding, what happened in Arizona. This isn't battery off-gassing, this is hydrogen, but this was testing done in a similar container. And on the top, you'll see that's an unvented explosion. So all of that force blows those doors off. But in New York City, we have requirements for explosion protection, right? So we have deflagration vents. They call these NFPA 16.8 deflagration venting. They're basically weak seams. If there was an explosion in that container, it safely goes up. Not out towards the first responders, it goes up. There's another sort of explosion protection. It's called an explosion prevention system with a fan, an exhaust fan, and gas detection. If we get gas in there, that fan kicks up. We keep that explosive limit below where it can get to this point where it can ignite. So we have different layers of safety. And we understood that different technologies are going to try to do it a different way. We gave them options. As long as it was tested, as long as it shows that it could be validated, you can use it in your technology. So these are kind of what we have regulation-wise. I talked about the outdoor and the rooftop New York City rule. That is incorrect. I should change that to 2022 New York City Fire Code. We finally paved the way for indoor installations after we got comfortable doing outdoors. This was being developed for about 4 years before, I'd say 2 years development, adoption, promulgated in October 2019. So this one's been around for a while. 2022, we said indoors, we're ready, right? Certificate of approval is a really important one in New York City. I don't know if has anyone heard of the certificate of approval? Okay, nice. This is the COA, excellent. Certificate of approval is something unique that we brought into New York City, and we said, okay, we don't want to spend too much time looking at every single site, having to vet out this technology every single time. It's going to delay that permit process. So let's figure out a way to get some accepted, approved technologies, right? We'll review those separately. Manufacturers will do that, provide us with testing, protections, whatever, yada, yada. And then we could have a list of approved technologies. You can look at that list online, currently available on New York City's website. It should be updated regularly. I think there's more manufacturers coming up right now. If you take a look at it, there's only a handful. But they're expanding that, right? So that's a really important one for New York City, not only for safety and acceptability, but also to streamline that permit process. Because we said 500 megawatts of energy storage in New York City. That's a tremendous amount. So we're going to have to figure out a way to put these in here and meet that goal. B28 certificate of fitness holder, I am one myself. It's basically that subject matter expert. If there's a fire, we go to the scene. We have to respond within 2 hours. And we're going to be that expert for the chief, for the incident commander. When he's asking us, what do? We tell him, okay, let's call up the network monitoring. Let's see what's going on. Stay defensive. Don't go open up doors. Use water defensively. If you need to use the sprinkler system, you can use it. It's at your disposal. But at least they're not sitting there saying, what do? They have a little bit of a phone a friend. A lot of wording here, a lot of technical stuff, but what I really want to get across is that it might seem like a very new and novel technology, but there's been a tremendous amount of thought into safety for these. And we talked about those different layers of the system, right? Cell, module, rack, unit. This technology is really unique in that it's required for you to actually burn it to see what's going on, to get this information, for you to design its protection systems and get it permitted, right? Not only in New York City now, throughout the country, everyone's adopting the same requirement, right? That's called 9540A testing, where you actually force them into thermal runaway, and you start getting data. How much gas am I making? How much heat am I making, right? Am I going to spread? Am I not going to spread? Now your engineers can take that information, they can design your protection systems and make sure that they work. Because going back, when I was sitting in that seat, and it wasn't really me, it was my chief at the moment, we had a new company come in, and it was this new lithium-ion technology, and they said this is completely safe. This does not burn, right? When he asked them, does this burn? What happens, right? These don't burn. These batteries don't burn. He said, prove it to me. So we were commissioned with the fire department, and Con Edison worked with DNVGL to do some full-scale fire testing. Oh, lo and behold, you force these into failure, they burn. At least we knew now, though. We understand now. It's not like we're just going to assume that they don't burn. We know how to design safety systems because we know what the hazards are. And that's really the reasoning for a lot of these protections are because of the tremendous amount of research that was done when there was almost no research available. I believe New York City ultimately paved the way for the rest of the country to understand energy storage systems. And 9540A, which is a really unique one, I really believe was born here in New York City at the fire department when they were sitting down with UL and saying, we need a test method to burn these things and understand how they fail. So here's all the bells and whistles we have in New York City, that full-scale testing, water spray systems, deflagration venting, alarms, a subject matter expert, that B28, a management system, and commissioning and decommissioning. Make sure you put it in safe. Once it's end of life, make sure you take it out. This is the exhaust purge. This is a unique one that we have in New York City. And basically, if you don't have an automatic way to exhaust that cabinet, and you know that you're getting a flammable environment in there, that chief could be at a safe spot, that certificate of fitness holder could flip a switch, we could start exhausting gas out of there. God forbid anything happens, we have deflagration venting, but at least they don't have to go open up doors, take a look inside. Just a lot of these additional protections. The certificate of fitness holder is basically a SME, somebody that understands the system, knows the site, knows all the hazards around it, and they can help that chief make any sort of decisions in the unlikely event of a fire. And they have to be immediately available. Phone call, immediate. If they call you to the site, you got to be there in 2 hours. New York City indoor requirements based off of a lot of the outdoor stuff because we figured, okay, this is working, right? We're comfortable with this. Let's use this template and bring it indoors. The TM2 is really important, that certificate of approval, because we want to vet out these technologies. And we want to figure out a way to take a look at that technology, get it acceptable, and then we can talk about getting it into a certain space. But again, we talked about unique challenges, right? New York City's dense. We're running out of outdoor space. We're running out of areas where not only is it zoned as of right, which now that's changing with City of Yes. Maybe we can expand on some of those usable areas. But is it zoned as of right? Are we close to utility infrastructure? Do we have any sensitive exposures? It makes it very challenging to find a site that's going to be appropriate for these systems. So that's a really unique challenge in New York City. I talk in other parts of the country on energy storage systems when people are concerned. Their house is 2 miles down the block. And I tell them, I don't know if I should be talking because I was looking at energy storage systems that were down the street from a church, across the street from a school. And the reason why we accepted that is because when we were looking at these systems, we didn't care where it was being put. I don't care if you're putting it on a roof of a high-rise building. I don't care if you're putting it out in Staten Island where there's nobody within 2 miles from you. We're going to put the same protections and the same safeties in that we're going to put anywhere else. You know, we're going to give it the highest level. Doesn't matter if you're on a church. It doesn't matter if you're in a residential area. It doesn't matter if you're in a remote area. All of those safeties are going to be exactly the same. It's held to the same level of standard. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm sure there might be some questions, but thank you very much for listening.
So I definitely have questions, but I wanted to actually open it up to the floor if there's anybody that wanted to jump in first. Go for it.
I'm curious to know just a little bit more about some of the alternative battery chemistries that we're starting to see at commercial scale. Like we just saw that LPO, it has expanded manufacturing for a zinc-based battery chemistry for ES Energy Storage based in New Jersey. I'm curious to know, like, 9540A is the gold standard to push these systems in the thermal runway, but how might that shift if it can, or what is like the most appropriate way to handle those new battery chemistries outside of lithium-ion?
So that's a good question, and when we take a look at the rule, it's not just lithium-ion. We have lithium-ion in there, we have lead-based batteries like lead acid, we do have some nickel-cadmium in there, and we have other. Zinc batteries were coming up, were not as prominent when I was there, but it's definitely a technology that's being developed now. 9540A, I think, is sort of the level the playing field, right? We're talking about all those different discrete levels of testing. A zinc-based battery might be able to go through that 9540A testing at the cell level and pass. So it doesn't go into thermal runaway, doesn't release flammable gas, If you pass that testing, you don't have to do higher levels of testing. So much more benign technologies, fire-safe technologies. They're not going to have to do that really expensive high-level fire testing, but they'll have that information for the engineering systems to show, okay, this is usable, this looks good. And that's kind of the whole intent of that. You can take that, you can bring it to the fire department, you can say our zinc-based battery doesn't go into thermal runaway, the hazards are pretty minimal, you don't only have to do X, Y, and Z. Certificate of approval process could actually change a lot of those requirements in the code if the testing shows that it performs well. So I actually think 9540A is very beneficial for that industry, especially a technology that's a lot more benign than lithium ion. It will sort of level that playing field and pave the way for them to be installed as well. So we don't really close the door on any new technologies, because I'm sure there's going to be some, other ones that are going to be in development.
Okay. I have a question. So this is a beginner question here for someone who doesn't know too much about the energy storage, but in my particular apartment building in Astoria, Queens, they have a rule, no electric vehicles in the bike room. And I'm curious if that is a overreaction to the incidents that have happened, or if that's more science-based in terms of like a residential, like me living my life and experiencing these rules against battery storage.
Yeah, I'm glad to see a fellow Astorian. I was born and raised in Astoria, so
Astoria too.
nice. Astoria is the greatest. I might be a little partial, a little biased. We've seen the videos, unfortunately we've seen the fires, and we've seen the deaths as well. So I wouldn't call it an overreaction as far as, right before my tenure ended and I had left the department, one of my last challenges was figuring out micromobility requirements. So how do we charge these things indoors before a lot of these failures were really happening? It started off with the hoverboards. It's really tough because I'm talking about energy storage systems, and it's something where I know where it's going to be, right? You take that, you scale it down, but you still have enough cells in there, and you put it on a bike, and you move it throughout New York City, it becomes really challenging. People modify their systems. We're in a right to repair state, so I'm allowed to modify my electric vehicle, my e-bikes, and things like that. It's probably one of the more challenging ways to figure out a safe sort of way to implement these technologies, just because it's a consumer product. So I think for the most part, there's certain things that you can do, like making sure devices are listed, making sure that they're not in your means of egress. The NFPA has let out a bunch of fact sheets. FDNY has a bunch of fact sheets. That's like good engineering practices. But unfortunately, or not, some building ownerships will say, you're not allowed, or this and that. So it's kind of, I wouldn't say it's an overreaction. It's just something that people are trying to figure out at the moment, because that's actually a very challenging issue right now. Yeah.
And I'm not an expert, but city council is passing a lot of legislation about e-bikes, and I think a lot of the batteries that are being used are secondhand, because a lot of the deliveristas can't afford new batteries. So it's also a worker issue as well that people are conflating with energy storage systems.
And that's a really tough one, because before a lot of these events happened in New York City, when I was going to planning board hearings, people would say, this energy storage system is going to be in my neighborhood. What about all these e-bike fires? And exactly like you said, these are unlisted devices. These may be modified devices. I lost the charger, so I just went on Alibaba and I got something that's third party, that's not matching that BMS and things like that. So once it becomes a consumer product, it's really challenging. But I think those steps are correct. You make sure that devices are listed by a regular, nationally regulated testing lab, and they're not modified. So that adds a tremendous amount of safety onto those.
Right here.
Yeah, two-part question. So, is there any public opposition to City of Yes other than concerns about energy storage safety? And also, when I call my city council person, Justin Brennan, I'm down in Bay Ridge, with the idea of decarbonization, building energy storage, environmental justice, with those goals in mind, is there any reason, from your perspective, that we shouldn't be advocating for wholesale approval of the reg as written?
I think we definitely want it to be approved as a whole. I think one concern is, maybe I'm just hypothetically talking, is that there might be concern about the energy storage systems, and they might try to change what is in the proposal. But to your first question, which was the opposition.
Any opposition other than
Yeah.
safety for energy storage?
I think a lot of it was like aesthetic concerns about neighborhood character. I think people are concerned that, solar canopies will change the character of neighborhoods, which I was talking to someone at Solar One and they were just saying like a lot of these buildings that end up getting solar canopies, it costs more money to have it 15 feet high.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people aren't going to be installing these solar canopies 15 feet high. I just think a lot of people are concerned about changing of the neighborhoods and what that could bring, but I'm of the opinion that one, I don't think this is going to happen overnight. Cities have to change. That's what cities are. We're not in a historic moment like that. We have to adapt to the climate crisis. So I think that was the main aesthetic and neighborhood character.
I would add just to expand on the neighborhood character piece. I know during the hearing that DCV had, the commissioners were concerned about okay, how many batteries are we actually gonna have? Is it gonna be battery house, or are we it's gonna be one per neighborhood? And it's the same thing with any of these, having a large solar array. Is it every single house? Are we gonna see a bunch of shadows? There's a little bit of uncertainty. I mean, I know from my perspective, the level that we develop at large scale, there's just no way that we would have more than two in a large neighborhood area. But that doesn't mean that people that want to have it in their residential home a small battery, or they want to have ideally people all can, if they want to, put their solar PV on their houses. That also came up as a concern with the commissioners.
And the last thing about the aesthetic, I also don't think every building's going to have solar canopies because there's not room on the roof for it. So it's not going to be every building. I think, it might be more than what it is now, but I don't think it's going to be you're going to be seeing solar canopies everywhere. But yeah.
Following up to this, but the city of Dallas just allows for this, right? They're not funding this to be built. So I live in Flatbush. I can tell you, I don't think all of my neighbors and buildings are all of a sudden going to be investing in putting solar panels on ours. Wish they would, but I just don't see it as a priority for most of these property owners. So you're literally just saying, hey, allow it.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, city of yes, because there's three parts, and this first part is carbon neutrality.
Yeah.
All of it is shaped as removing red tape.
Yeah.
Right? So enabling practitioners that would otherwise be developing a solar array, and they have to make it much smaller than it otherwise would because of some weird zoning restriction, or those types of things are what he's trying to cut down on, because it's just not efficient and it doesn't make that much sense. Okay, skip some. There's a hand back here.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a viewer submitted question. He's essentially wondering what the FDNY thinks about lithium iron phosphate batteries. He says he lives in a co-op, and that he sees the way forward as being local battery storage in individual buildings. This is particularly important as the city bans gas stoves, and they want people to have induction, and local battery storage is a pathway to induction stoves. But yeah, is there any guidance on that?
So the lithium iron phosphate technology, I guess when we were there, and also sort of a school of thought that we have at ESRG, we don't discriminate between sub-technologies of lithium ion. So nickel, manganese, cobalt technologies that oftentimes make the news because of fires and are very volatile and things like that, we don't give any special treatment towards the lithium iron phosphate or towards the NMC. There's a tremendous, not tremendous push, but a lot of the LFP industry will say our batteries are safe. We will hear it again, our batteries won't catch fire. Another part of ESRG is that we have a full-scale testing lab in Ohio where my boss gets the really fun job of actually burning these things, right, and seeing what happens. He does the 9548 testing. And he says it all the time, Give me enough fire, I'll get an LFP battery going. It's not a bad thing. It's more along the lines of the hazard is different. So the reason why the fire department doesn't discriminate, the reason why the codes don't discriminate is, again, we have that 9548 testing that's leveling that playing field. So if you truly do have a safer technology, that's great. Prove it to us with 9548 testing. Actually burn it, tell us what the real hazards are, and then we could say, okay, these are the safeties that you need to implement. So there's no sort of distinguishing part of it, but if you look at the certificate of approval that they have on FD&Y, there's actually a mix of NMC technology, of LFP technology, hopefully some new alternative technologies are going to come up there soon, but that's sort of the way that they, address that.
Thank you.
All right. Go ahead.
What specific red tape are you aware of that's going to be removed from the solar panel process? Some years ago, I know there used to be a regulation that if you put solar panels, it counted as a new store in the building, and that was a big roadblock. But I thought that that had been removed. A lot of the other regs have to do with firefighter safety, so you can't just cover the roof with a zillion panels unless you use one of these covers. So what specifically is in the law that would make solar installation more rapid?
From what I believe, there are restrictions about sloped roofs, and I can follow up with more details. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Restrictions on what?
On sloped roofs.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Instead of flat roofs, and I know there were height limits as well.
There's also some flexibility on setbacks. There's not as extreme of setbacks as was before. And then I think the height restriction that has increased by a couple feet.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is at this point, because City Council could always change it in their modifications. But yeah, I think that those are like a couple examples.
I assume the text of the law is available online somewhere.
Yeah, since it's not, it hasn't been approved by City Council yet, so City Council can always change what the City Planning Commission approved, but usually it's within like the scope of what City Planning Commission. So once the vote will happen sometime in October, then it'll become.
Oh, okay, that's very soon.
Yeah, like, it'll become law, I guess. So.
Any other?
My question is kind of tangential. It's about Local Law 97, which you mentioned. I'm curious on your expert opinions on the feasibility and potential effectiveness. You talk about City of VS, which is removing red tape, which is helpful, but it's not necessarily giving as much support as needed to certain buildings to reach these targets. And in addition to that, the government isn't necessarily providing as much policy detail as it needs to actually help building owners understand what is required of them to meet these goals. And it's coming up quickly. So what are your general opinions?
So I think Local Law 97 is like, there's a lot to unpack. The city just proposed new rules to help implement it, which I am not going to talk about because I'm still like reviewing it. But generally, there's one component for Local Law 97, the new proposed rules, where building owners will have to submit like an electrification plan to help that. They're also offering like electrification credits to offset if they have emissions. Don't quote me, but like they are trying to make it achievable and yet still, have buildings reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. I think, the city is trying to find like a middle ground because it is a fact that there's going to be a lot of buildings that don't have the money. And I agree, like the zoning is one thing, funding is a whole other thing. But the city does have like, it's called NYC Accelerator, where it helps buildings come up with like resources and everything. So yeah, I hope that answers it. But Local Law 97 is a whole nother topic. But
yeah, unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to give you a good insight on it other than the fire department has paved the way for indoor installations because we're running out of rooftop space, we're running out of outdoor space, especially with, I mean, look at some of these high-rise buildings. We're going to be fully electric. That load's going to be tremendous, where you can't put a battery on the roof that's going to be big enough to support those loads, right? And we're not going to have any natural gas connections, so it's really kind of falls on the battery end. The fire department understood that that need was coming, so the 2022 fire codes paved the way for indoor systems. So instead of seeing some of these larger, maybe utility generation floors in these larger high-rises, you'll have maybe a battery room, just to try to meet those electric demands.
Yeah, and actually, to the earlier or question about feedback, I do know that in Queens that was one of the borough's feedback, and I think ultimately they, at least at like some community board levels, they were conditionally accepting City of Yes, specifically because they were really concerned about Local Law 97. Ultimately, it's an enabling policy and not necessarily, you know, the key to making these upgrades. So there is just, it's just one part of the puzzle. Go ahead.
Sure. I'd say this is primarily for Amelia, but granted, actually, she answered it as well. But it's like, all right, you know, I'm a random citizen here. What would you suggest that I do that supports either this specific City of Yes initiative or the things that it is meant to support? Like voting for sure, but like should I just go knock down my city council person's door? Like what things from your professional expertise would you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think specifically for this zoning proposal, since it's with City Council, you know, contacting your City Council member, and I know NYLCV, we're going to try to put together an email to our members, so if you want to sign up to become a free member, you know, we'll put together an online letter you could submit to your council member based on zip code in support of it. That's just one very small example. I just think generally, like, advocating to your elected officials is really important, and that's part of what NYLCV does, is that we have a political side, so the more you can lobby elected officials that this is just generally, we need more climate policies that will help people and reduce air pollution. You know, that's another example as well.
That was perfect. I can't add anything onto that. Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead. Can I build off of his question and just ask about what red tape is being pulled back for storage systems in the same way that we talked about solar?
Yeah, I think for the majority of red tape is going to be in the zoning restrictions and the allowances and as of right, which is going to be probably removed with City of Yes, but a lot of integrators are also sort of feeling the growing pains of energy storage system installations because New York City is a very tough market to navigate, and understandably so. The reasoning is that, you know, again, going back to that densely urban environment, this is what we're installing these systems in this, you know, we want to be really careful about it. So the New York City process is challenging. It's not just FDNY, it's also Department of Buildings, OTCR. You have to do your Con Ed interconnections, right? And Karina, you know this much better than I do. I kind of get lucky and I put my blinders on and I focus on the FDNY side. It's a challenging process, but again, the department understands that, and that's why they implemented the certificate of approval process. So now you can say, okay, I'm going to go with an approved technology. That should make it a little bit easier, at least in some portions. CUNY is a great resource, and they developed a lot of guidelines. Working with DOB and DNVGL, they have a permitting process guideline, everything that you need to do. So there's resources out there to sort of make it a little bit easier on integrators. It's still a challenging process, but again, they're putting a tremendous amount of thought into reviewing these technologies. They're not just rubber stamping it and letting it go. So there's really talented engineers right now at the fire department. Their day-to-day activities are to just look at energy storage systems. Where is this going? Let's get involved in the code process. That oftentimes might delay a little bit, but it's also instilling that safety into that installation. It's kind of a balancing act.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, so the current process, so the things that I described earlier about setbacks and some other kind of minor changes affect energy storage in a very similar way. But the main change that's proposed is that currently you can install as of right in manufacturing zones and then up to 10,000 square feet in commercial zones. That would change to any size commercial, still including manufacturing, and then the 10,000 square foot limit would be in residential. And so to Nick's point about the process, currently, if you want to go through, and there has been, not my company, but there has been another energy storage developer that's fully gone through what's called the Board of Standards and Appeals process. That is, used to be like 9-month process, and it just kind of now is 12 to 15 months. Like, it's just kind of keeps it growing in terms of timeline and expense. That is a discretionary permit process that you have to go through, and it's none of the FDNY measures change in that. It really just adds more review. Specifically, like we've seen, I mean, there's specific criteria that those projects have to meet in terms of, you know, supporting the local community, but the types of comments that you would typically get back are about aesthetics, and not necessarily about safety. So you're not actually going through that, you know, 9 to 15 month process and getting a safer project out of it. So this would skip that process for 10,000 square foot residential sites and below. Go ahead.
Kind of a piggyback question. I'm really focused on decarbonizing heating systems. I'm on a volunteer board member for my co-op 60-unit building. Over the years, I've gotten to push through painfully some great energy projects, the most difficult being on-site solar. We eventually got through. What I have not even brought up to the board is how do we electrify our heating system? And so, you know, really I'm curious, I'm looking for more tools to make that argument. It doesn't financially pan out like LEDs did, like insulation did, like, you know, solar kind of did. What is the red tape that was removed for electrifying heating systems? I noticed heat pumps caught my eye on your presentation.
I'm not an expert on this, but I think for under this proposal, heat pumps are, I forget what I don't think they're, hang on, I have it in my notes. One second. Oh yeah, yeah, it's removing placements of where heat pumps could go. It would allow them on roofs and in yards, whereas I guess currently there's restrictions on where heat pumps can be placed. Again, I'm not an expert, and the zoning proposal, you know, I'm sure there's more information online and I can follow up about that, but I think it's had to do with the location of where heat pumps would go.
That's helpful.
So it seems like the fire is more of an internal problem with the way the system's made, but I'm wondering if there are external problems that have come up in terms of safety regulation, earthquake, flooding, vandalism, forest fire. How have those been handled, or are we really just focused on it self-combusting?
No, that's a great point, and it's not just the prescriptive requirements for the technology itself. A lot of the installation requirements, like setbacks and things like that, are protecting the system from not a fire generating from that energy storage system itself, but maybe an external fire. So there's 10 feet separation setbacks and things like that. And the seismic one is unique. We're not in a very seismic area, but we do a lot of work in California. That's sort of one of the gray areas right now in the code. It's not as big as an issue right now. That's sort of being incorporated into the code. But other than that, yeah, all of these things, security fencing and things like that, to prevent people from going into the facility. It's not just focusing on the technology, but it's also making sure that any external factors are not going to affect that battery as well. So, yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I have a plug and a question. Next week, we're going to have an event here that's talking about the incentives aspect for building owners through federal resources and then local resources. And I know that it was mentioned earlier, the NYSERDA funding there. That is certainly a resource to help with local law 97 improvements. I know also that the city's really pushing the J51 abatement. I don't know if your building would qualify for that, but in terms of funding for resource for local law 97 compliance, they've been pushing that greatly. But in terms of, I think that's kind of the carrot, right? Where this is the city, and yes, is a little bit of the stick, or at least, you know, freeing up a lot of building owners to make some of these improvements, because it's difficult to ask them to make these improvements without having these zoning changes. I'm a little bit interested though in if there are changes, I don't know, for the city, I guess, for incentivizing improvements in neighborhoods that have been disenfranchised historically or kind of forgotten about, particularly in terms of resiliency measures to make sure that there isn't flooding in these neighborhoods. And I know you mentioned rain gardens, and I saw some, they were exploring like putting rooftop gardens on the newsstands, for instance, just to kind of help flooding. So I wonder if creative solutions are being considered.
Yeah, I don't think the zoning proposal doesn't target specifically disadvantaged communities and like investment in that. I think those are all like separate. So under the Bond Act, for instance, that voters approved last year, it's required by law that 35 at a minimum to 40% of the benefits from the funding of the Bond Act will go towards disadvantaged communities, and that's a term that a climate working group that was put together at the state level established what criteria, like what qualifies as a disadvantaged community in the state. So that's like one example in terms of funding going directly to disadvantaged communities. And then another example is the Biden administration has something called Justice 40, where they kind of took a similar path as New York, where certain amount of funding has to go toward disadvantaged communities throughout the states. But I know, like, you know, the mayor's office for climate and environmental justice has a lot of policies that they're exploring to specifically target, you know, environmental justice areas throughout the city.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is also covered in the economic portions of City of Yes that are not carbon neutrality. On the rainwater piece, I can just add that there was, so also during the testimony for DCP, the Bronx Borough President had commented that there was stormwater initiatives that had been held up based on, you know, regulations that were kind of arbitrary or antiquated that would be freed up through City of Yes.
Kind of like following up on the question of environmental justice, is there like any kind of way that the City of Yes outlines certain requirements in terms of siting these energy storage systems, or does the FDNY talk about siting maybe being like disproportional in one area versus like another area? Any talk about that?
Yeah. So the fire department is very agnostic with where these systems go. They're going to review every application as it comes in. So, but they're also going to look at it with the same level of care, regardless of where it's put in. So that was I think one of the best parts of being there is that it doesn't matter where it's being put. We're gonna take a look at it. We're gonna make sure that it's done safely. If you're in a more of like a remote area, if you're in a very densely populated environment, it's all gonna have the same level of care. So again, they're going back to a little bit of that. We're just gonna take a look at every single one. It doesn't matter where it's being put.
Yeah, I can add a little bit from the developer side. So there's all different sizes. I was talking earlier. You know, folks might want to have their own personal battery, and that's a totally different scale than what we work on when we're connecting. These are front of the meter systems that are, you know, small utility scale. There is an upper limit to what you can even put on the local grid or what's needed in a given neighborhood, and so I would imagine, you know, there's going to be an even spread. It might depend a little bit on how the utility grid works in a specific area, but for the most part, you couldn't concentrate them the way that we do with natural gas power plants in only specific neighborhoods, which is actually why it's so critical for us to have the ability to go into purely residential areas, because we can't support those areas without being on their grids, their like direct grids. So, you know, the environmental justice aspect of this is that as we put more energy storage on the grid, we're able to turn on those peaker plants that are natural gas burning in those environmental justice communities less and less and less until we can actually decommission them.
aesthetic issue seems like a huge barrier. I was just wondering, is that coming from like the residents themselves, city officials, and is there a plan of attack for, you know, conquering that obstacle? Whether it's like a design element, do we make them prettier, do we make them, you know, easier to install? Because that's not going to go away. So I just want to see what the thought process is there.
I think a lot of the aesthetic, at least this is just from my perspective, was a lot of residential because it just went through the community review, community board approval. So it was a lot of residents, part of the community boards that were expressing that concern. I don't think I'm not aware of any elected officials expressing the aesthetic concern, but I think like plan of attack, definitely design is important. So like we shouldn't diminish that design is not important, because I do think a lot of like, you know, technologies can be better designed, and like, you know, when you see like really big systems on the roof, like maybe one day it will become like part of the design process. So.
Yeah, I might have a little bit of Stockholm syndrome with these systems because I like seeing them and I point them out and I want my kids to know that what these things are. I want, you know, people to be interested in these technologies and not just be afraid of them. But you mentioned aesthetic. A big question that comes up whenever we go to planning boards is noise levels as well. These systems have HVAC, and we have a lot of systems in one place. How loud can these systems be? So surprisingly, one big pushback that we've seen in more other municipalities, maybe more rural areas, is how loud are these systems? Let's say it's a hot day, we have the chillers running, and then they have very smart engineers that go there with sound equipment, and they can say, okay, it's not going to be that loud. I mean, we live in New York City; we're in a loud place anyway, so I haven't heard it here as much, but it goes hand in hand oftentimes with the aesthetics of it, and there's privacy walls and things that people can put up, but you know, I'm a little bit more of the just let it be there. It's a benefit too for firefighters; they can see what's going on, but I don't know if everyone's going to agree with that.
I can add a little bit to that too. So New Leaf Energy actually submitted comments to hopefully get some real requirements to address aesthetics. There isn't something that in City of Yes in particular that like increases how you address it. However, because of the noise concerns, there's existing codes that we have to comply with, so we always end up putting up some type of noise attenuation instead of just like only a chain link fence or something like that. And then I also think, especially when it comes to like energy storage aesthetics, to date we've been allowed to put them only really in manufacturing zones, and there's not the same emphasis. First of all, to like not make them look like the auto yard next door or whatever, but also in the existing code, if you're adjacent to a residential lot, you would have to put up screening. So that's like a vegetative buffer or something like that, that already exists. It's just that because we haven't been building them in those areas, everybody thinks we're just going to take what's in manufacturing zones and just stamp them in residential as well.
I had one more thing that I actually forgot to mention, like in my presentation, but for the Aesthetic Landmarks Preservation Commission, the city agency that handles, you know, landmarks and historic districts, they support this, and you know, any type of like design change in a historic district or on a historic building, it would still have to go through LPC's approval. So, for example, like historic buildings or buildings that are in historic districts, they still have to get approval by LPC. So there's still that, like, you know, compliance that it goes along with the historic context. So that's, you know, another counter argument, I guess you could say, that there are still regulations in place to address design considerations in historic areas.
I was kind of like questioning whether you're fighting the masses or maybe like one person at the top who's like, I don't like the way this looks or whatever. But if, you know, if you got a block of people in the crowd, it can be hard to get that point across.
Yeah, definitely.
What about like, oh, sorry. It's an interesting point about the composting and like tying it to aesthetics. Do people associate composting with the rat problem? And then
I did hear that in the hearing the other day. There was one commissioner that was concerned about that, but Yeah.
We've always had rats.
Yeah. I do think DSMY, I mean, I'm not, another topic is like DSMY is trying to tackle waste containerization. So like they have new rules for businesses when it comes to trash and composting. Hopefully it will alleviate the rat issue, but we'll see.
All right. I have 5 minutes, but it looks like are there any other questions?
Yeah,
oh, you have one too. Okay.
For Nick, I wonder if you'd be able to say, or if you know, what was the cause of some of those recent energy source system fires in our area? I mean, there's a reason they didn't happen in New York City specifically, from what I recall. But like one of the things that comes to mind, like explosions is one thing that seems like pretty solid ways to deal with. But like one of those, as I recall, was burning for multiple days. So it just like stays in the news cycle, stays in the news cycle. That's like one of the other big things that could really, feels like, derail things if like stuff like that happens.
Yeah.
Any kind of frequency.
Unfortunately, I could only tell you from what I get from the news articles. NYCERDA is the governor's office put together a working group to really spearhead the root cause analysis of this. So they're going to take a look into it and see what's going on and make sure if there's any deficiencies in there that it gets swept across New York State and those are taken into account. The fire department is very interested as well. So to be TBD, but there's a good group of people right now taking a look into that and on a daily basis, pretty much just. This is like they're in and out for the day, trying to figure out what happened and what's going on. So, I'm working on it.
Yeah. So Nick's company is working on those projects, so we can't talk about it, but I can. And I'll just say that kind of like what you mentioned, it's not a technology that's approved here to be used in FDNY territory, and so all of the systems that you were hearing about were not ones that you would find here, at least now, because they haven't passed all of or they haven't met all the criteria that Nick listed out.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. If that's all of them, I guess we can wrap up there. Thank you so much for the great questions.
Thank you.